for the next hour and 20 minutes, I'm going to play the meeting, the audio from the meeting that happened March 3rd, 2017 at LDS Church headquarters between Trevor and his former mission president, current General Authority Don R. Clarke, and Matthew Groh of the LDS Church History Department. Again, Matthew Groh's official title is Director of Publications at the Church History Department and General Editor of the Joseph Smith Papers. So this is a guy who, more than anyone, has seen and thought through the problems with LDS Church history, and we're going to hear how he and Elder Groh respond. Does that sound all right, everybody?
Sounds like a plan. Sounds good.
And we have panelists John Hamer, Lindsay Hansen Park, Glenn Ostlund of Infants on Thrones, Lindsay of Sunstone, and Glenn of Infants on Thrones. All are going to be listening. And then after we play this recording, part 3 is going to be our reactions. We're just going to kind of discuss it after we bring Trevor back just to talk briefly.
Well, we really appreciate your guys' time. I mean, to give you a brief background of us in the church, she was a convert. She was baptized when she was 17.
Okay.
Right? And before that, just, I guess you could say, evangelical.
Yeah.
And so that was a big thing that we had in common, was the church, when we met, and we both loved the church. I grew up in the church. I'm third generation, member, and so it goes back a ways. And everybody I know is a member of the church. It
right.
Seems like,
sure.
Not know, but my closest family and friends.
Right.
Everybody's a member of the church. So leaving the church was not ever on my radar.
Sure.
It wasn't ever anything that I even gave any attention to or thought would ever happen.
Yeah.
But it was last year, last spring, when I started having some doubts. I've always had, not always, but I would say over the last 3 or 4 years, I'd had like certain things kind of pop up where I was like, that's interesting, but
right.
We can't understand everything in this life, so I just kind of put it on the shelf or whatever,
Yeah.
And then, but then it was last summer when I came across the CES letter.
Yeah.
Somebody had shared that with us, and we read it together, and basically, the reason I looked into it was because I started opening my mind a little bit because of all the travel that I've been doing, I guess. We did a film on Buddhism last spring, and I remember as I was with these people, I was just thinking, man, if I was born here, would I have an open enough mind to even look at Mormonism?
Sure.
If I were born, into a Buddhist family or Muslim or whatever,
right.
I would probably be Buddhist or Muslim,
right?
Just because tradition's strong, you
right.
know what I mean? And so,
definitely.
And so, do I have an open enough mind to open my mind to additional ideas out there? You know what I mean? And so that's when I was like, what, I'm gonna just kind of look around. I'd never looked at another religion.
Right.
I never read anything apart from the Book of Mormon and the scriptures outlined by the church. And so I just started kind of opening my mind to it. That's how it started, And that's why I was open enough to read the CES letter.
Right.
And it was hard, we I'm sure you're familiar with the CES letter.
Yeah. So let me just give you sort of
background.
1 minute background on me. So I'm a historian by training. I went to BYU and then went to Notre Dame for my PhD work. Spent some time teaching at university there. And since I've been back in Utah in the past 6 years, my position here in the Church History Department is I'm our Director of Publications.
Right.
Which means I oversee the Joseph Smith Papers.
Wow.
I was involved in the production of the Gospel Topics essays on sort of difficult questions. So
wow.
As part of that, then I've had and we also do some women's history projects, and we do the history section of LDS.org. So I've had that sort of opportunity through the Gospel Topics essay process to really kind of delve into these.
Yeah, you've definitely been exposed.
Yeah, so that's just kind of.
That's awesome.
Where I'm coming from.
Well, great. Well, I'm glad to be sitting down with you.
Yeah.
It sounds like you probably know a lot more than the average.
A little bit of time with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then it just kind of, I guess, spiraled from there, you know what I mean? Kind of looked into that, and then I was like, there's no way.
Yeah.
Because I just never heard of some of these things.
Right.
And I'm 35 years old, and I was like, why?
Yeah.
You know? And so I felt almost deceived.
Yeah.
You know,
for sure.
And so it was hurtful. I started looking into, and not deceived from anybody that I know personally.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because we're all kind of, I look at us as we're all in the same boat, but more just from like the upper ups of the church. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know that the church is trying to be a little more transparent with certain things, you know. But I think there's certain things that they can't be without it, you know, losing some ground, you know. And so that's when I was just like, okay, I'm gonna ask these questions, you know.
Yeah.
I need to know, and so the first thing I did is I ordered how many books. Like, I mean, we were getting boxes and boxes from Amazon, you know, just Joseph Smith, and I felt like I was married to Joseph Smith last year, but read, you know, No Man Knows My History, Fawn Brody. I read Rough Stone Rolling. I read Mormon Enigma, you know, Emma's book, and then Mormon Origins, you know, An Insider's View by Grant Palmer. And but I was also looking at the church's position as well, you know, especially when we first looked at the CES letter. I was cross-checking and, you know, I mean, like I had like 5, 6, 7 different windows open, you know, and tabs, and I was just like, I couldn't believe what I was finding, you know. And so anyway,
and in terms of the church's position, what do you mean by that?
In terms of really, the church's claimed to be the only true church on the face of the planet. You know, that's a really strong statement to make.
Right.
You know, and there's very few, if any, churches that make that claim, you know.
Right.
I mean, I think all churches believe that they're on the right path, or you know what I mean, the most correct or direct path to God. But I just, you know, with the LDS Church, it's very clear cut that it's the only true church, you know, and it has to be, obviously, with the restoration and everything. It's kind of all or nothing, right? So anyway, and so the first thing I did is I went to my bishop, who he was Elder Amado. He was one of the 70, and I actually knew him from the mission. He would come and speak in Trinidad. Veronica knew him before and everything. So it's kind of cool that he's our bishop
now. Okay.
He's our bishop now. So it was really cool.
Yeah.
But I took about, you know, maybe 10 big concerns to him, you know, and unfortunately he just couldn't answer them, you know. And I appreciate the fact that he wasn't making stuff up.
Right.
You know, I just said, look, if you don't know, like, it's fine just to say that you don't know, but I just I want to know if you know something I don't. And so that was kind of a fruitless conversation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then just started talking to other leaders in the church, other people that I know that are strong in the church. Recently, I tried talking to my parents about it, and they won't have it. You know, which was really was probably the biggest blow to me, because when I first told my parents, you know, confiding in my parents, instead of kind of like a loving, like, I don't know, acceptance from them, it was more kind of like a disappointment. Like, I'm now the embarrassment of the family. Why would you even say that, you know, kind of thing. And they won't even look at anything. And so that's when I started being like, wow, there's even more going on here than I thought. And that's when I started seeing the mind control happening. You know what I mean? And that's when I was like, the Mormon Church is a cult. I mean, I know that's a strong word to say, but you know, I've read books on mind control and what is a cult and all this kind of stuff. And we always look at outside churches like they're crazy, like Scientology, and you know what I mean? And it's like, wow, how can people even believe that? But now, from the outside looking in, I see it with the LDS Church, and it's really sad, because I'm like, Mom and Dad, like, if you really care about me, you know, and you believe that my salvation is on the line, why wouldn't you at least sit down with me and go over some of my concerns, but
Right.
but they won't, and so that's scary to me.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah.
I mean, obviously you're not in that boat because you look at this stuff every day,
I mean, I'll just say I think from both sides in that kind of a situation,
right?
That being a member of the church is so much of who we are.
That's right.
Right. That is, it's painful when it's painful from you
That's
as you're
very
leaving,
true.
but it's also very painful for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I was having this
that
conversation with
happen,
Elder
right?
Clarke, is that it's tough to have a conversation like this with somebody you love,
Right.
and not make it personal, because people's beliefs
Right.
and who they are is so
Intertwined
with
our beliefs, yeah.
that you knock somebody's belief and you're knocking them as a person. And
Right.
you know what I mean? And so I don't want that to come across ever.
Right.
But I've realized that I can't talk to the people that I care most about
Right.
regarding this stuff, because it's too damaging.
When I get on that list,
Well,
Elder Clarke.
yeah, he's the exception. He's the exception. And I told him that. I said, you are the exception. I mean, when I first told Elder Clarke, the first response was that he loves us, and so that was really awesome. And we had a real open conversation about it, and he was just honest with me and has facilitated this meeting.
Right. So I mean, I'm hearing sort of a number of different sort of areas of concern, right? One
Right.
is sort of,
There's an infinite.
right. Sort of the universalism of the church versus kind of this particular church truth claims, right? One is the sort of is the church kind of a cult-like mind controlling sort of behavior,
Corporation,
and then one is kind of what you would have encountered in the CS letter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like these specific historical or doctrinal
That's right.
sort of issues.
You nailed it on the head.
Okay, well then
That would be it. And the third is obviously the biggest.
right.
The other two have come.
The other
as
two are
a-
kind of fruits of the third.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I'm happy to talk through the CS letter is an interesting thing.
Right.
Most of the claims in the CS letter, most of the statements, and
Right.
and I would say from my perspective, certainly a lot of what is there is factual.
Mm-hmm.
A lot is factual, but put in the worst possible light.
Right.
And then I think there's also errors in in the letter. So
Yeah, and I've read that.
It's kind of a mixed bag, right?
Fair Mormon came in and did a debunking of it, and I read that as well, because I wanted to be, you know what I mean, fair on it.
Right.
And so I know the things that are exaggerated, and we knew that going into it. It's like, hey, this is obviously from a disaffected member of the church.
Sure. So there's and the letter of the CS director is sort of the kitchen sink approach, right? Where let's not look at one thing in a whole lot of detail, but did you know this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Right? And I totally get that reading it through is sort of an overwhelming experience. And you can think, well, even if half of this is true, what is going on here? Right? That sort of experience. So Elder Clarke did share with me
the email.
Your email,
okay.
just so I could
saw my top
get some
5
sort of
kind
sense.
of
Concerns. So I guess where would you like to start? I mean,
it's open right there.
What could I do? Oh,
is that it? Yeah,
that's it. I just printed it out.
Yeah,
actually.
Cool.
Yeah, just to.
Well, okay. So no, I mean, and some of it may not apply to you as much as other.
Sure,
points,
I'm not an archaeologist, right?
Right. I would love your take on the stuff, though.
Okay.
I mean, you know, and if you don't have a comment on it, that's totally fine.
Let's just kind of
brush through it, I guess.
Right. So, of course, your number one is this kind of question of the spiritual witness and this kind of universalism, and I guess my main sense of that would be that I think sometimes the rhetoric in the church has been, or can be taken to be that we are the only true church and we are the only one with truth.
Right.
But I think that if we look throughout church history, I mean, there's very clear prophetic statements that truth is everywhere.
Right.
Truth. Yeah. There's truth in Islam. There's truth in Buddhism. Confucius was a great spiritual teacher.
Right.
I think one way to even look at Joseph Smith or to think about him was that he was willing to sort of get truth from wherever he could find it.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, one issue that kind of trips people up sometimes is masonry. Right. And my take on that would be that Joseph saw some truth in masonry, takes it, incorporates it into larger truth. Right. So he's looking for truth everywhere he goes, and I think that we should be doing the same. Right. I mean, there's truth in all the great world religions, and we shouldn't be scared of that. And then certainly, I think what the church would say is unique is the sort of authority piece, right? The priesthood piece on top of that,
right?
But I think I think part of in growing up in the church, I think sometimes there's kind of these mixed signals,
right?
Right, and that's what I'm hearing from you in part, like. Why didn't I know some of this stuff until I was 35? Like, that doesn't seem right? Why wasn't the church more transparent? But let's maybe get into those transparency questions in a minute. So, I'm not sure that I'll have a lot of great perspectives on that sort of, is the church the only true church? But I think that's the way I look at it, is that there's truth everywhere.
There's truth everywhere, yeah.
And that I think, we're on really good sort of Mormon ground for saying that, right? I mean, I think there's lots of prophetic statements in the past that, there's sort of a first presidency statement in, I don't know, 1978 or something that says, look at all these great world leaders or things like Confucius and Buddha and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and our whole thing is, you have truth, let us add to that. Yeah. And that's kind of that's how I always took it. What confuses me is when things are in direct contradiction to, like, for example, the breakoffs to the church, our LDS church, faith or whatever, and it's like they have different prophets than we have,
right?
But yet their testimony is just as strong as as somebody in the LDS church, and so
or an evangelical testimony will be just as strong and just as felt,
But that one's not as in contradiction, because you could say, well, of course, because they have the base of Jesus Christ.
Right.
And we just want to add to that, so I can see that. But the ones that are in direct contradiction to each other, those are the ones that get me hung up. Does that make sense? Because people get up
and you see that particularly like in a community of Christ.
That's right. Like, I believe Warren Jeffs, was a true prophet of God and all this kind of stuff, and they're crying and you feel the Spirit and all that kind of stuff. And so that's confusing. And so I'm not saying that, like, I'm just saying that for me, like, it just got to the point where I couldn't base everything on that anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's conditioning that comes along with that, history, tradition, memories, spiritual experiences that I've lassoed to the church.
Right.
And so I'm trying to just separate, because as you know from my introduction, I do believe in God and I do believe in spiritualism. I'm just trying to separate my spiritual experiences and religion a little bit.
Right.
And so that's kind of that's my number one, is that I was basing everything off of that. Any concern that I would have, I would just sweep it under the rug, because I'd say, well, I feel good about it.
Yeah.
But that's what every other person could say, in the world. Scientologists.
Right.
You know what I mean? People that are part of just crazy organizations. And so I think just because I've seen so much of that, I'm like, I put myself under the magnifying glass a little bit and realize, like, I can't like accuse others of, like, following a false feeling and not put myself in that same basket of judgment.
Right.
So
no, I understand that, and feel free to weigh in on anything, Elder Clarke.
You're doing just fine.
Yeah. So the second kind of area of concern is the Book of Abraham. And maybe that's what and
this stuff obviously is more stuff that you might be able to help me out with.
And of course most of this would be drawn, like, directly from CES.
Exactly.
Right. Have you read the Gospel Topics essays?
I've read them in parts, but I haven't read all of them.
Okay.
And I would say I've read probably 70%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I haven't read them all in their entirety.
Okay. Yeah.
But I have read what they do have on the Book of Abraham.
Okay. So you read the Book of Abraham essay?
Yeah, okay. I did. And it didn't quite like there was some justification there, is how I saw it, but it didn't quite, like, answer it 100% for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about that.
Let me just kind of give you my perspective on Abraham, right? So we know that the problem is that on a surviving scrap of papyri, and of course we have to remember we've only got 10 or 11 of these scraps of papyri. Everything else is gone, right? Destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire and all this kind of thing. Right. On one of the surviving scraps of papyri is part of facsimile 1, right? And we know then that what we know as facsimile 1, Egyptologists would say, is a funerary text. Right. And we know as well that the scrap that we have of papyrus doesn't date to Abraham's time.
That's right.
Right. It dates to the 1st century BC or 1st century AD, around there. Right. So that's the core problem, right?
Yes.
And I think there's two basic ways to think about it, right? One is that maybe Joseph had other things, so we know he had these scrolls of papyri. Maybe, and we know the other scraps of papyri don't seem to have anything to do with Abraham. Right. So one response.
So maybe there was and that's what I read is that we're seeing what we have.
Right.
But it's so minimal in what Joseph may have
compared to what he had. We know there's good descriptions that he has rolls of papyrus, and we know we just have some scraps. For me, the more persuasive way to think about Abraham, and I think this goes along with sort of Joseph's career as a translator, if we can use that kind of terminology.
Yes. Yeah.
So we know he has two impulses when he encounters an ancient text. One impulse is more what we would term a scholarly impulse, or more of a kind of a traditional translation impulse, and one is more of a spiritual impulse. So when he gets the Book of Mormon, one of his impulses is to take some of the characters to a scholar. And say, do these match up? Right, that's the kind of the Charles Anthony story. Right. And of course, we know then the other is this kind of spiritual impulse. When he wants to translate the Bible, produce what we call the inspired version of the Bible. Right, so he's reading through. We know that he's consulting scholarly works as he does that. Right, he's got biblical commentaries.
Of course,
and
he grew up
right.
Yeah, he grew up in a very Protestant-heavy, people doing the tours, and, he knew the Bible a lot more than we give him credit, I think.
Right. And so then his other impulse is he claims that, he says that some of the Bible revision is just coming through straight revelation. Right. So for example, the Book of Moses, which is kind of the twin book in the Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Abraham. How does the Book of Moses come? Joseph just says it comes.
Yeah, it's just revelation.
So he's working on the Old Testament with the Bible revision, and then it comes as revelation. Right. So there's kind of the scholarly impulse. He's trying to study some things out, and then he says it comes through revelation. So fast forward a few years, and of course Joseph is fascinated by ancient languages. Right, he talks about, can we recover the Adamic language, right? There's this real interest in language. He studies Hebrew, right? All this. He studies Hebrew, he studies Greek, all this sort of thing. What does he do when he gets the papyrus? They try to figure it out.
Yeah, he treats it more of a scholarly kind of...
Yeah, initially that seems to be very much what they're doing. So we have a set of records that we call the Kirtland Egyptian papers.
Right.
They're mostly in the hands of Joseph's scribes, but Joseph has some writing on those pages as well. And it seems like what they're doing is they're copying characters from the papyrus, trying to figure out how they might relate to each other. And of course, at this point, no one can read Egyptian. Right, the Rosetta Stone is like 10 years earlier, and just no one knows about it. Right, so they're trying to kind of puzzle this out.
Yeah,
and then the Book of Abraham comes, and so another way to think about it is that the papyrus is the catalyst for the revelation, and the revelation. The text of Abraham may be on the papyrus, or it may not be, right? But,
I could see how.
But the papyrus sort of catalyzes a Book of Moses type experience.
It kind of sparks, sparks the topic, and then he consults and gets spiritual revelation and creates a work around it.
And one problem that we have with almost understanding almost all these issues is that we wish we had more records on them, right? So Joseph never tells us how he gets the Book of Abraham.
Right.
He never tells us how he translates it. Even his scribes tells us very little about the Book of Abraham. Wilford Woodruff tells us a few years later that maybe he uses Urim and Thummim or his tear stone on it. One of the scribes says he just dictated by sort of the power of God, right? And so I think those are the two basic ways that people would think about it. One is that, well, maybe it's just not there because we don't have. Right. And the second is, this could be just a funerary text. Or it could be a funerary text that, it's 2 millennia later from Abraham, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't contain writings of Abraham, right? It gets passed down over time or something like that. Right. But maybe the funerary text is the catalyst by which Joseph received
and that's basically what the papers say, right? And I can see that perspective. Yeah. I can see that. You know what I mean? It's just unfortunate that everything that we have as a testable, item to test his translation abilities is proven a fraud, and so it's.
Well, I'd say it's untestable. Well, which is a different sort of question than that is a fraud. Right. So let me just throw in one thing here.
What about the facsimiles though? Those are testable though. When we agree that the facsimiles from what the Egyptologists
I would agree that it's not a correct Egyptological translation. That doesn't mean that that there isn't revelatory power.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Right? So or that they're given a new meaning.
Okay, so from the world's standpoint, it can be viewed as straight up fraud, but they don't take into consideration the spiritual aspects of
So no one's going to tell you that facsimile 1 is a correct Egyptological translation.
Right.
And you've got people like John Gee and others at BYU who would say, well, actually, this God does match. I mean, they can put some interesting things on the table that'll kind of give you a pause and say, oh, well, there does seem to be some Egyptological things going along in this facsimile that Joseph wouldn't have had access to. But certainly, I mean, no one disputes that facsimile 1 is kind of this correct Egyptological translation. But I would say that doesn't mean that it's not imbued with new meaning in a new context, which is kind of what I was trying to say
I can
about
see
Masonry, right? Joseph takes something out of one context and brings it into a different context, and it's imbued with new meaning, new power, that sort of thing. I totally think that we need to follow the prophet, and I honor the prophets. And at the same time, should we march around the kids in nursery to follow the prophet, right? Because it sort of can create that sort of sense that that you're talking about. I mean, I think we do need a better understanding about what a prophet is.
Yeah, I just everything that is testable from Joseph Smith, even Zelph, the skull that he found. He said, this is Zelph from the great, Lamanite army or whatever. And that was, proven false. So it's like anything that's testable on his ability to translate or see ancient documents for what they are has basically just been shot to heck for me, And I mean, obviously we don't, like you said, we don't have enough to be able to really test it. Right. You know what I mean? We don't have the plates. We don't have all the papyrus. We don't have, but just, it's a big concern because everything we do have points to the fact that he wasn't very good at it.
And by everything, we're talking really sort of Book of Abraham and
Book of Abraham, Zelph.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's other things we can look at with the Book of Mormon, and you could come up with theories of how it was written.
Right.
You know what I mean? But, taking the view of Hebrews, the great, the late war.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many books that exist around that time. The 1769, King James Version of the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, you take all of that stuff and you can construct a story pretty easily based on material that he would have had, that was written before the Book of Mormon, that he could have constructed it. But there's nothing testable like this, though.
On that sort of stuff, I would say if like view of the Hebrews is as I know the CS director makes a big deal out of View of the Hebrew and the Late Great War and all these things.
Right.
I'd say go read them.
I've read them.
Have you?
I read the View of the Hebrews, and I read through the Late War, but you get to page like 20 and you're like, okay, this is, you know what I mean? It's not worth my time. It's just the verbiage, and it came to pass. And, I mean, it sounds like you're reading the Book of Mormon,
Right.
So,
Right.
So I could see that there's valid arguments, but the reason they're not in here is because they're theories.
Yeah.
There's, you know what I mean? And so...
Yeah. And I think those arguments really get down to this question of the verbiage of the Book of Mormon. We were the last couple of years I've worked a lot on the records of the Council of 50. You may know a little bit about that group. Brigham Young has a really interesting statement in that council. He basically says, I wouldn't be stumbled if the prophet translated the Bible 40 times over and it was different every time. Mm-hmm. He says, why? Because God always speaks in the verbiage of his translator, right? And so I thought it was a really striking,
that these are spiritual translations. They're not literal word for word like we do. You know what I mean?
It's not an academic translator.
Like Google Translate.
Right.
Yeah.
Joseph can only express
interpreting
in his own language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, and I was going to mention earlier. So you probably have heard of Terrell Gibbons, and
of course. Crucible of Doubt.
Yeah.
I read that book.
Yeah. So I got to work with Terrell on a project once, and I've heard Terrell talk about it. It basically says, all of these questions at the end of the day are just going to be muddled, right? Because and you can marshal evidence on one side, you can marshal evidence on the other side, and that's the way God left it,
right?
Because of that role of faith or that role of So I think that's why.
Except I think that the church
claims.
though redefines how faith is viewed though.
Okay.
Because before I thought, where logic ends, and science ends, you know what I mean, and God, is, I feel like there's a bridge of faith, and that's like classic, definition of faith. But I think the LDS Church redefines that in a way that's like in spite of logic, science, DNA, archaeological evidence, all of that, in spite of that, have faith.
Yeah,
and so that's my next. I think it's my next. I would say
on all of those questions, those are all in those kind of muddled sort of areas. But so I'm no expert on sort of Mormon archaeology or things like that. The DNA analysis, anachronisms, archaeological. I mean, why have you read the church's essay on DNA?
I have, and. It's kind of like the book of Abraham, where it's like, okay, I could see it wasn't convincing to me, but if I were like, I'll just follow the Spirit on this one kind of thing, then I could maybe look past it. But the fact that like there's zero, I mean, Jerusalem exists, you know what I mean? We have, the Roman Empire. We have so many just so much data pointing to the fact that those people actually at least lived. Right. And I think that faith comes in at that point where it's like, okay, Jesus Christ may have been an actual person, but I need to have faith to believe that he did all of the miracles that he did. That, to me, would be faith. Yeah. If there was no Jerusalem and there's no evidence pointing to that the people actually even existed, and it was a made-up fictional story, I don't think you would have nearly as many Christians in the world because it'd be a made-up story, and that's how I look at the Book of Mormon, is that if after 150, going on 200 years, we don't have any archaeological evidence directly supporting the Book of Mormon, that to me is a big deal, because we're not talking a few 100,000 people, we're talking millions of people that there was a war supposedly by Hill Cumorah that numbered in a couple million, and so where would maybe the bones and the hair, right? I mean, you would find that in the dirt, I think, but even if that went away, like where's the armor and the swords and the, you know what I mean? Just anything.
Right.
You know. So that's probably, if there were a smoking gun for me, that to me was like, boom. That was probably the domino that started everything else.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the big one.
Have you read John Sorensen's work?
Not as much as I would like to, but
because if I were channeling John Sorensen, I think he would say, actually, there's lots of archaeological or textual evidence that the Book of Mormon is an ancient book, right? There's traces in the book, or there's traces, and certainly there's no sort of remains that say, like, this is Nephite, right?
Of course.
But
they're theories, though.
Yeah,
is what I see from Sorensen.
Sure.
There's theories, and like this is where this could have happened,
right?
You know what I mean?
And there's lots of archaeological remains of people in the Americas.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Yeah, but not in the time of when the Nephites and the Lamanites would have lived. It's more like when I would go to the ruins.
Although
like
the Olmec
Chichen Itza.
culture is, in that same time period, right? Pre-BC.
Well, I know they found ruins that date back to 15,000 years ago in Texas.
Yeah.
But that's not Book of Mormon times.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that, they found some stuff, but it's not the Book of Mormon people, And so I don't know.
It's hard to know, right?
I mean, when it's in the millions and you talk about them burying their swords, and the streets that they would have had, I mean, they're talking about giant civilizations, man. They had to have had, they had chariots.
Talk about fortifications and cities.
Yeah, and so,
sort of thing.
I don't know. That's to me where faith is redefined, And so that section's a big one for me. Things like horses, cattle, oxen, sheep, swine, goats, elephants, wheel, all that stuff just didn't exist before Columbus, and it's in the Book of Mormon.
Right.
And so just no archaeologist would be able to stand by the Book of Mormon as a historical record. Right.
So I don't know if I can give you
that's
science,
fine.
but and the anachronisms. I'd say that same thing about verbiage, right? I mean, Joseph only has the words that he has, right? And so if they're describing an animal, a South American animal, let's say, and Joseph doesn't have the word for it, what word is he going to use?
Right, and that's where you think where the tapir comes, and it's a tapir instead of a horse and all this kind of stuff, and I could see one or two or three things, but like sheep, swine, goats, elephants, like elephants. Like
What's
that's
that? Sure.
What would that be?
Right.
But anyway, so
right, and I do know that some of this stuff is disputed, like the still and the iron, and
of course there are a couple things that are silk and stuff.
Right.
But I just threw them all in there because they're all issues. You know what I mean? But,
right, and the DNA is an interesting issue, right? I mean, it's
right.
I guess I find more convincing sort of this idea that of course, there's pre-existing peoples in the Americas. Lehi and his family come here. Who knows what DNA they have, first of all, right? I mean, because it's not like we have a sample from Lehi. The example in the church essay is this a geneticist who's Italian, who's a member of the church, and his DNA says he's Mongolian or something, right? I mean, it's just
right.
DNA is tricky because we don't know Lehi's DNA, first of all.
Right.
We don't know the founder DNA, so that's what you would call the founder effect, right? So you don't know the DNA that you're beginning with. You don't know the extent of intermarriage that happens when they get here, right? Was any original Lehi DNA kind of swamped by intermarriage with any pre-existing peoples? Yeah,
I've read on that. I think your biggest point is whether his DNA was Semitic or not.
Right.
Because when they brought the daughters of Ishmael and all that. I mean, from there you can kind of see that, but you don't know. I mean,
you don't know. Yeah, I mean, you're still starting with a relatively small group of people.
That's right.
And the other thing population geneticists look at is if there's sort of, big catastrophes in a civilization, because those will change the DNA sort of makeup, and are there catastrophes in the Book of Mormon? Well, a few here and there. Right?
I mean, don't we believe though that Lehi and his family were one of the first ones in America?
I don't think we know that.
I don't think we know.
Okay.
I don't think the church says that.
Ever said that.
Okay.
we know that the Amalekites came from a different place, and so it isn't impossible.
The Jaredites.
But there are people already here, right?
The Jaredites were here long before,
right?
And so it is not impossible to believe that other groups, for whatever reason,
were here,
didn't ever keep their records.
Right.
It's just like, just like the 12 tribes of Israel left. Okay, who knows where they went, how they got there, and someday we'll have their record. But I think the trouble is, I think it's more this way.
Yeah.
And I think what CS letter tries to do is put everything this way.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just think about this whole DNA thing, I mean,
yeah,
it's interesting. People come over here, they now have a new family history center, and it shows what their heritage was. And a guy that thought he was
X is
Y.
Y.
Was on TV, excuse me. The announcement on TV, the guy said he thought he was this, and he found out he was 70% Italian, and now he's wanting to do this, because he thought for 100% sure that he was. And we have no idea where all of Lehi's, we have no history of Lehi.
Right.
So he could have easily been a conglomeration from other places.
And but doesn't the intro to the Book of Mormon say the principal ancestors of Native Americans? And they changed it.
That's right. I mean, I think it is true that, people in Latter-day Saints in the 1800s generally assumed that all American Indians were descendants of Lehi.
Yeah.
And I think over time we've understood that that's probably a misreading of the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon doesn't say that.
Right.
The Book of Mormon is kind of silent on this question, so it's an assumption
that
people have brought to the text.
So the introduction was made after the fact.
Yeah.
Made by
and then
somebody that just said, wait a minute.
Just trying to
the introduction is written by a church committee in 1920.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not.
Which I'm sure was
It's not
approved,
part of the original.
but I'm sure it was approved by the prophet, though.
Right. Sure. Just like I would say, the gospel topics essays were approved by the first presidency.
Right.
But there's a mistake in the gospel topic. There's a historical error. There's a error in the science. I don't impute that to the first presidency. I impute that to people doing the best they can at the time, and certainly the first presidency weighed in on questions of doctrine and presentation and all that.
But don't these men talk to God though? More than we do.
Well, what do you think that means, talk to God?
That's a good question because I always thought that the prophet would go to the temple and talk to God.
Yeah.
Almost face to face.
Let's go back to what happened when they got the revelation of the priesthood.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know how long that took?
Yeah. It took.
So it wasn't that.
It wasn't right away, actually.
So it wasn't the President Kimball.
Right.
He had contemplated, thought about it, prayed about it, meditated on it, and it wasn't like, well, it said I need to go do it, and that happened that day.
Yeah.
For them, it's a process, just like it is for you and me, a process.
Right.
And President Hinckley said that at the end of this process, most of the time what he feels is a still small voice, right? There's kind of an assumption in the church that the higher you get in the church hierarchy, that the way you communicate with God suddenly changes. And I think that assumption's 100% wrong, right? So certainly.
So what would be the use of a prophet then? I mean, because a prophet is a seer.
Yeah.
He's a revelator.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's a mantle on him specifically that not every other member has. Right. And so I was always under the assumption that as a prophet, seer, and revelator, a prophet would have open conversation with God. I didn't view it as something
communication versus conversation.
Okay, yeah, communication.
Yeah. And I certainly believe that communication happens, but I believe it happens mostly through kind of a refining of the process that we all go through to get spiritual communication, right? Which is the influence of the Holy Spirit rather than sort of certainly we have instances, I think, of great dramatic spiritual outpourings and of talking face to face with God and this sort of thing, but I think that's more the exception than the rule. Although
I think that's probably. I don't think we can understand exactly when and how God talks to a prophet.
Right.
And I think that in the case
there is no way to know.
But on the revelation on the priesthood, I think that was a
right.
However it was done, like whether the heavens opened or whether however it happened, it happened.
Right.
And so I think prophets. What God tends to do with prophets is He tends to keep us in the right direction. It doesn't mean that Marianne and I were talking on the way up today. She said, you look at this. She says, what's my chances of keeping my kids in the right direction?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm out of what this is.
Yeah.
Right. Because here's where the world's going.
Right.
The world, even in the church, we got problems. But outside the church, they really have problems. When the Jewish people come here, the first thing they do is say, how do you keep your kids?
Right.
Said our kids are just leaving.
Yeah. Right.
And we had a Jewish guy here yesterday. She said, there's so many. So, so I think there's two things that I think are important. I know you have to leave about it too, but I think we'll come back.
Yeah.
Because I think
it was great.
I think what you have to think about is that this guy isn't any more honest than you think we are.
Right. And well, the thing is this isn't taken directly from. Obviously these things are in the CS
don't read
letter.
his book, but I'm just telling you.
Right.
He's not any more honest than we are in your mind.
Right.
I'm just telling you a fact.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
This guy's not. For example, I know this guy promised he wouldn't publish his book before his mother died. His mother didn't die, and he published it.
Right. Right.
Okay, to me, of all the things you want to look at somebody who's trying to get you to go somewhere is who are they really?
Right.
Okay. And so if you don't honor your mother.
I think it got to the point with him though is that he cared too much for it.
He cared too much for who he wanted to become. He's put himself over here as a person.
I think it's all in how you look at it. Because if you look at this as truth, okay, think about it. I know it's crazy.
No.
But if you think of this as truth,
Okay.
wouldn't you want every person that you love to know the truth?
I understand that.
You know what I mean? So I think it got to the point with him where he was like, no, I don't want to wait for my mom to die because I want to share this with her.
But let's go one step further. So my only thing that I would add with that is that this guy should lay down the other side also. The church didn't do that in the beginning. I agree with you.
Right.
And I think we found out that was a mistake for whatever reasons. So I'm going to say wrong.
Right.
But they are trying now to do the other. And he doesn't even try to do the other. So he lays this thing out with these plates, and it's gobbledygook. I've read enough to know it's kind of gobbledygook. Joseph didn't do anything with them.
Right.
Except one statement in one thing that he's taken and says, okay, that means Joseph's not a prophet.
Yeah.
And that's not fair.
Yeah, the Kinderhook plates, I could see that for sure.
But he uses that as a big deal.
Well, and I'm not saying that 100% of the CS letter is total factual, because, like you said, it's obviously skewed and and magnified in certain ways. But what I found is what he did do is so Fair Mormon came in and they did a debunking on the CS letter, and then what he did is he spent 2 years investigating everything that the church brought to him. And he was like, look, I want to make sure that this document is nothing but truth. And so what he went and did is he revised it in 2015. So it came out in 2013. He revised it in 2015. And then he came up with a full essay, and it's giant. I think it's over 1,000 pages. And it's him looking at each point that the church made. You know what I mean? And taking them.
That Fair made.
Yeah, the Fair made.
Yeah.
Oh, I should say the church. I should say the Fair made, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Isn't Fair, though, hired from the church?
No.
They're totally separate.
Oh, they're totally separate.
Yeah.
Separate.
Okay.
It's a group of members of the church that have tried to weigh in to help people that didn't get the whole story.
Right.
But there's no funding from the church.
There's no funding for the church.
Okay.
These are good members of the church, worthy members of the church, that are trying the best they can. Doesn't mean what they all put out would be
church. Yeah. Well, I would love the church to then actually, because I think that the points are very valid.
Yeah.
I would love to see the church's standpoint, the official church's standpoint on these issues.
Well, I think the closest you're going to get is the Gospel Topics essays.
Yeah.
So, and I understand that the Gospel Topics essays don't cover everything in the CS letter.
Right.
But they cover, I think, all the important points.
Right.
With an exception here or two, they don't really get into Book of Mormon archaeology and some other things.
Right.
But I mean, if that's what you want, because even. And I will say there's nothing on the witnesses on there.
See, that was one thing that I really like. For example, I walked in here today and I see this, down below. There's these awesome, art renditions of the witnesses. They're handling the plates. They're looking at the plates and all that kind of stuff. And that's the first thing you see when you come in the church history building. And that's not true. So that's where I see there's some whitewashing going on.
Yeah, see, I think it is true. So the 8 witnesses, there's nothing about spiritual eyes, or you read their statement, and I think the statements that are in the CS Director, it's kind of pick and choose your sort of thing. A lot of really, later statements from antagonistic sources and all that sort of thing.
Well, they all ended up leaving the church.
Well, that's not true either.
They all ended up following the Strangites.
No, that's the witnesses?
Even Emma. Yes, all the witnesses and Emma.
Okay,
and so they were saying
several of them are dead by that time, and
some were dead.
So,
yes,
so you have to leave that
right.
Caveat. I mean, Cowdery doesn't go Strangite.
I would say it, except for Cowdery. For Cowdery, but Cowdery.
I'd have to think that.
But Cowdery is a liar, a counterfeiter. How can I trust Oliver Cowdery? Joseph Smith said that he was a liar and a counterfeiter, and so
Joseph and Oliver. But back to the point, I would say that the 8 witnesses. I mean, I understand the CS Director the letter is basically saying that they're not saying they saw it in their natural eyes. They're saying they saw it in their spiritual eyes. I don't think that's true with the 8 at all. And certainly the 3 are saying yes, we saw it in vision.
Right, they saw it in vision, like I see a city through a hill.
Right. So and none of the 8 ever say, hey, like, I didn't sign my name to that. I mean, that's just that's kind of a big issue, I think.
I think it's just the fact that they all ended up leaving or being completely, like, ostracized from the church, and, like, all of their credibility taken away from them from Joseph Smith himself was kind of like...
Yeah, I think there's a lot of detail there.
Right.
We'd have to discuss each one because it's sort of all over the map.
You need to look at, each witness. Each witness is a different story.
It's sort of all over the map, but
the 3 for sure...
Yeah, the 3 for sure.
The 3 for sure testified that they had never seen them with their physical eyes. They saw them with their spiritual eyes.
Well, they say they saw them in vision.
They saw them in vision.
Yeah.
They saw them in vision.
Joseph saw the Father and Son in vision.
Right.
First vision. So that doesn't mean defining vision. Okay.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's not as touchable as he did.
Right.
So I think what happens is you have to be careful with all this stuff.
Yeah.
Listen, there's a lot of unknowns.
Right.
Facts of life. But I think the trouble is that you have to be careful that this isn't as bad as this.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think if we had smart people sitting in the room with this CES guy, he'd maybe sometimes win, maybe. And maybe these guys would sometimes win. What it means is that it's not exactly what he says it is. Okay, I'm not suggesting whether he believes it or not. I won't make a judgment of it.
Right.
I'm not going to judge that.
Right.
And he may believe everything he has.
Sure.
And he may believe he's done the best job possible.
Right.
Okay, he may well believe that. But it's not all right. And so that means that every part that I find wrong, does that discredit everything?
Yeah, that's true.
So what happens is, so I want you to be careful on the other side, that every part you find wrong, that it discredits everything.
That's right.
Because it's not exactly what he says it is. And I'm not judging who he is, but it's not exactly what he says it is.
That's true.
The reason I brought you here is because I'm not as smart as he is.
Right.
Okay? I don't have to be as smart as he is. I don't have time to be as smart as he is.
Yeah.
Unless I want to make it a full-time job.
Right.
Okay? I can't do that. I have a million other things to worry about. But what I hope that we can at least start today, and we can get back together, is to understand that there are smart people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that aren't just trained by LDS people. He went to Notre Dame. He's not just a Mormon or Blacko.
Right.
That has tried to put perspective to some of the stuff today.
Right.
Is there stuff that maybe will be unanswered? The answer is yes. But it's not as bad as what people have led you to believe.
Well, the difference would be that this guy is a man and he professes to be nothing more than a man, and he's not running a religion. Whereas...
Oh, he is running a religion.
No, he's...
Oh, yes, he is. He's running the anti-Mormon religion.
Well...
And that's what he's running. So where does he want you to go now? Because right at the end of this name, he said, when you follow me, that's what he told me. I'd have 3 other people the same. That's what he tells you to tell.
He doesn't tell you
the answer
to say
I don't know.
Actually, that's not from the CES letter.
Where's he taking this?
Well, this is not straight copy and paste from the CES letter.
Let's just take whatever.
My whole thing is, if I find truth, I want to value truth over tradition.
I don't think we would argue that at all.
And so
we value truth.
And so I believe that if what I'm reading is true, okay, in the sense that the church has whitewashed their history and has not come forth with any evidence to support the Book of Mormon.
Well, you need to read this book by.
I'll read it more, but
read it.
But you know, after all the research that I've been able to do, I'm not saying that the church is not inspired. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it's not. Oh,
we're not moving around enough.
Yeah.
The thing is way back.
I'm not saying that it's not a good organization.
I understand.
But to say it's the only true church, it has very shaky grounds. More shaky than I thought. Because I was leaning on the Spirit, I was leaning on the witnesses, I was leaning on the fact that there was, some historical evidence for the Book of Mormon, And then the last thing is I would say is the more I got to know Joseph Smith, the more I kind of started to despise him because of how he treated women, of how he just did certain things, you know what I mean? And his rise to power and trying to, and it's no wonder to me now that they were driven out of so many states. I mean, when you're committing crimes, polygamy is not legal. You're trying to marry people that, women that are tied to, state leaders, and you know what I mean? Like, you're going to have some issues with that. And so my biggest thing was I didn't know the depth of the polygamy of Joseph Smith, and I didn't understand the polyandry. Like, why would he marry women that are married to other men, priesthood holding members of the church?
It's a great question. And I'll just say that I've had a very different experience from you in that I've spent a lot of the last 6 years reading what Joseph wrote and reading documents about him.
Right.
It's not an exaggeration to say that I've probably read almost everything Joseph wrote.
Wow.
With some stuff as we get into Nauvoo, because we haven't covered that as thoroughly.
Right.
And it's been a different experience for me. I've come to like him better. I've come to think he was more genuine. And so it's...
if you read his writings...
And I've also read plenty of the ancillary.
Have you read the journals of the women?
Yeah,
and you don't look at that at all as abuse.
So I will say, let's be careful here, because one thing we have to understand about Joseph Smith and polygamy is that there's almost no contemporary records. So there's no journals. These women are not keeping journals. There's some reminiscences, and the reminiscences tend to support Joseph more than anything, right? And so the difficult thing about Joseph Smith and polygamy, about Nauvoo polygamy in general, is we have almost no records that were created at the time. So we just have kind of reminiscent accounts from one side or another. There's a few small exceptions to that. And that also means that on questions like the polyandry, where Joseph is sealed to men already married, it's really hard to know what's going on. It's like, why would you do that? I mean, we know, first of all, it doesn't continue. Right.
It doesn't.
So we know that in later eras that this isn't part of plural marriage.
Did Brigham Young practice polyandry at all? I haven't looked into that. I know there's a lot of crap on Brigham Young, but I don't really care as much because my whole thing comes down to Joseph Smith.
So Brigham doesn't practice polyandry in the same way that Joseph does. Brigham marries some women who are legally married when they're sealed, but that has more to do with the difficulty of obtaining a divorce if you're a woman in 19th century America. So and this happens all over the place, all sorts of people. I mean, Andrew Jackson marries a woman who's already married, and it's a big deal in his presidential campaign because she can't get a divorce, right? That's kind of the power of women in those days and that sort of thing. So polyandry,
but that wasn't the case, though, with Joseph Smith.
Yeah, so we don't... Yeah, that's not the case with Joseph. So we don't have any statements from Joseph on polyandry. We don't have really any statements from any of the women.
We do have statements of him lying about it, though.
Well, not about polyandry specifically.
Well, not polyandry, but polygamy.
About polygamy in general. But on the question of polyandry itself, we really don't have any statements from any of the participants. So it's really difficult to know what's going on. I think, from my perspective, there's a couple of possibilities. There's the possibility that, and one other fact that we know about the polyandrous marriages is that all of the statements from the women that we do have indicate that they were not marriages in a traditional sense. Joseph doesn't financially support them. None of the polyandrous wives testify that there is sexual relations. Now, we don't have statements from some of the wives, so it's hard to make totally blanket statements, but the ones that we do would seem that they put it in a category of these are sealings for eternity rather than marriages in this life. Right. So I think that's an important fact to understand. But still, there's this question: well, why? Now, most of the polyandrous marriages are not to women sealed or married to priesthood holders. Most of them are to women whose husband is not a member of the church, is a disaffected member of the church. So this may have been a way in their minds, for these women to have had access to the blessings of eternity, right? I mean, if sealing is essential for exaltation, and they can't be sealed to their own husband, so that's one possibility.
See, that's why it's so messed up in my mind, is that religion can justify really messed up things.
Yeah.
Like Islam, for example.
Okay.
You look at that and these people going around killing people and all that kind of stuff. It's like, we're like, wow, who could actually do that? But we do that.
Yeah.
We say it's fine for Nephi to kill Laban.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like murder, rape, like marrying other men's wives, like that kind of stuff. Like, when you look at it in a religion,
right? Although when you say marrying other men's wives, that gives a different connotation than this idea.
Right.
Well, there is some sort of sealing relationship in the afterlife, but there's no sort of marriage in this life, and that's what we know about the polyandrous marriages.
From what I understood, is they lived with Joseph.
No,
they had relationships.
No,
with Joseph.
None of the polyandrous marriages that we know about.
That we know of.
And we know statements by several of the women who were in these polyandrous marriages. None of them indicate that they lived with Joseph. I mean, certainly they don't live in his house,
of course.
But none of them indicate that there was sexual relations. And the same thing is true with, I know you bring up the very youngest case we have, which is Helen Mar Whitney Kimball. From everything that we know about, that would indicate that it was a sealing for time rather than a marriage. In eternity, and I know
but
the
why,
CS.
Man? She's 14. Like, she has her whole life to find a priesthood holding guy.
Oh, sure. That's we do have to understand there's this sort of a different culture around marriage.
It was illegal then, though.
Well, I read a book on a guy named Thomas Caine, who was a Philadelphia aristocrat, non-Mormon. He was 31 and he married his 15-year-old cousin. In the same, so the marriage takes place in 1853.
Right.
It kind of raised eyebrows, but not really. Right, so it's just a very sort of different
I think it's the fact that it was multiple. You know what I mean? And he was doing it because he was a prophet. They didn't fall in love. You know what I mean? Like a 15-year-old getting married to a 30-year-old. They fell in love. I mean, maybe back then, like, it would have been a little weird, but people let it go.
Right.
But when you go to a 14-year-old and you say that there's an angel with a flaming sword.
So the angel with the flaming sword, we get that from one of the plural wives.
Right.
And what she said is that Joseph told her that if he didn't...
that the angel would kill Joseph.
That the angel would kill Joseph. Not that if he didn't marry this woman specifically, but if he didn't go forward with polygamy generally.
Right. But I mean, that's a big threat. I mean, to put on these little kids, like...
So in that case, the case that we know about, which is Zina, she's not I don't think she's a teenager. I mean, she's one of the ones in her 20s.
In her 20s.
But still, certainly from our perspective, a 14-year-old marriage is not what anyone would want for.
Like a daughter and
for anyone currently, right? Yeah. I mean, it is sort of a different...
A daughter and a mother set and stuff like that. And the thing is that all of this stuff goes against Scripture, It goes against the Bible. It goes against even D&C 132. Yeah, I just don't even like the idea of polygamy. And,
Most people have a very hard time with
And
it.
who does, right?
Marianne doesn't like the idea of polygamy. Okay?
Right.
But to enter into the kingdom of God, we all have to be polygamists, and so that's something that
I
women
think that's
have
just
to,
not true.
think
I mean, the church doesn't teach that.
But Brigham did.
Brigham, even in Brigham's statements, you can find things that indicate that monogamous people are going to go to heaven as well. I guess the way I think about it is
Contradicting statement is all I'm saying. You know.
yeah, but I don't think the church has ever taught, except in a few periods of the anti-polygamy raids and
Right.
Brigham Young's era, when the rhetoric to defend polygamy sort of goes sky high. The church has never taught that you need to be polygamous to enter the celestial kingdom or the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, and
Not since then. Not since then.
right. So you can find some statements, and
You can find some, but it's been a while.
but you can find contradictory statements from the same
Right.
era.
You can.
Yeah.
You can.
And the way I think about it, that particular question, we're told in the Doctrine and Covenants that the same sociology that exists among us here
Right.
will exist among us in heaven. And the vast majority of Latter-day Saints who have been sealed in the temple have been monogamous. Right? So if you do some sort of calculation over time, 98% of people sealed in the temple have been in monogamous marriages, not
Right.
polygamous marriages. Why would we think that we'd get to heaven and 98% of people will be polygamous rather than monogamous?
I don't
right?
know.
Yeah, so I
That's why it's confusing, though.
well,
and-
but what's
and-
confusing about it?
Well, what's confusing is that there's contradictory statements. You know, like Brigham Young said.
Yeah, but
You know.
but trying to hang our hat on every Brigham Young statement that we can find.
Well, because you got
yeah,
Adam
matters.
God, you got blood atonement. I mean, Brigham Young he's got crazy doctrine and said from General Conference.
Yeah,
So
there was sort of a different style in General Conference
a different style.
than there is now. But yeah, I mean, there was more room for speculation.
But what will
People
happen in
speculate.
100 years to what the prophets are saying now? You know, against gays, against, I mean, is that going to be reversed? Are we going to allow gay marriage in the temples? Stuff like that. Because, I mean, there was a time where we wouldn't have ever allowed the priesthood to be given to a black man. And now today it would be ludicrous, like, completely.
Yeah,
know.
I'm much better at the past than predicting the future.
No, I mean, I'm just saying that's
and who
kind of
knows?
the way the church goes, though. It just kind of adapts to whatever's kind of, the norm for
Yeah.
the time. And so
I guess the way I see it as a historian is, of course, we all, including church leaders, are enmeshed in the culture that we're born in.
Mhm.
Right? So if we're born in 1830, we're going to be racist by the standards of today.
Right.
Right? And there may
No matter who you are.
Right, no matter who you are.
Right.
Even this Thomas King guy mentioned, he was an abolitionist.
Mhm.
He went through more personal danger protecting runaway slaves than any of us would ever do for race relations. But by our
We're
standards,
talking 1970.
by our standards,
We're
they
not
were deep
talking
bigots.
18.
Yeah, but
I think
it's not
that's
like
a-
America was all that enlightened in the 1950s and 1960s, right? And certainly there's change, but my point is that we're always enmeshed in culture, and I
Right.
think sometimes the prophetic gift is to see beyond that culture,
Right.
to keep us on the path where we need to be. I mean, certainly there's aspects of culture that I
Right.
think the church will always reject, but exactly where the church will be in 100 years on any particular issue. I think we can
Yeah,
say
who
that there
knows?
are core doctrinal
Right.
principles that are clear,
Right.
that won't change. A lot of other social trappings, whether we'll still use organs, or,
Yeah.
I think there's
Does-
lots of ways that the church will be different.
Do you think the first presidency knows why people are leaving the church?
I think this idea that the leaders of the church are not in touch with what's going
Right.
on is 100% wrong.
So why would the prophet not consult with God and get answers to these questions that go against the church? He's a prophet, seer, and revelator. I want to believe it. You guys, I don't want to leave the church.
Yeah.
But this is too much. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, these are 5 of like 100. And you can
No, I
hear them
understand.
come out.
It's the kitchen sink sort of deal. I know.
Yeah, but I think trouble is, if we get in tit for tat, this will go on
Right.
forever.
Right.
The next 10 that come after that, then the next 10
Right.
that come after that.
Yeah.
So listen, I think.
Well, the thing is that it's not resolved, though, to me.
Well,
Well,
I think to resolve is a good question. I think what it is you have to at least know after today that there's at least different points of view on some of the things.
Right.
There's these different points of view that are not done. This is not a dumb guy that's, he's...
I'm not saying anybody's dumb.
No, but I'm saying that. I'm saying that because I think, that are somewhat logical, maybe as logical as his.
Right.
Maybe more in some cases. I don't know the answer. Okay? But the end of the line, though, when it all is said and coming done, if you take away, Elder Oaks recently gave a talk, if you take away that things at some point in time have to be that you can communicate with God and find out whether it's true or not, they'll never get to the end. Right. Because there'll always be another tit for tat. Okay?
Right. Why have a prophet then if he's just like us? That's my question.
He's not just like us. Because he's sent the direction. I mean, all you have to do is look at the direction of this church, okay, that talks about eternal families and all this stuff.
Right.
That's what prophets do. Prophets aren't going to resolve every one of your questions.
Right. But they don't prophesy or see anything. I haven't seen a prophet.
All you have to do is just look at the proclamation on the family.
I've read the proclamation of the family.
And back then everybody said, this is not of him. And look how it relates to where the world is today.
How so?
And so in terms of beliefs about family, beliefs about marriage, and beliefs about this.
But see, it's a very homophobic document, actually, because it's saying that homosexual people that are born homosexual, that's what I believe.
I know, that's what I believe. We don't know. We would tell us we don't know how they get to where they're at.
But to not allow them to be happy, and not be able to have a family, that's really sad.
You have to look. I mean, Trevor, you say that God must have, if you believe in this God that set this whole thing up, if we were all homosexuals, there would be pretty soon the thing just ends.
Oh, well, I'm not saying that we all need to be homosexual, but I'm saying let the homosexuals live a happy life as homosexuals, because they can't change.
Well, we don't let people that aren't married have sex to live a happy life, because that's what they believe they should have.
Right.
So, I think the church has done lots over the last little while to try to help that group. Okay? Perfect? No, because some of them would want to be married and have partners or whatever they want to have. I think in terms of right to work, in terms of all these other things, I think we've tried to, in terms of if you have that, you don't act upon it, just like all these young people that aren't married, they can be worthy to go to the temple if they don't act upon what they would rather do and have sex and then get married later.
Right, except that they eventually get to have that right, whereas homosexuals never do. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, just...
That's fair, but, so, redefining...
But see, so that if
the prophet has told you how the family is defined.
Right, but I'm just saying if that's the prophecy that we get from, you know what I mean, if that's what we point to, and that's the only, you know what I mean, I think we need to define what it means to be a seer, a revelator, and a prophet, because I don't see what I believe a seer, revelator, and prophet should be doing. I don't see prophets after Joseph doing that anymore. I feel like it was cut off after Joseph, and we're just kind of a rerun. You know, like every general conference, I'm looking for something.
Perpetual education offense, not a prophetic.
New.
The number of temples we have today aren't prophetic.
But the thing is that's all stuff that, like the temple, it's not really helping people.
Well,
because masonry done in a building, like a really nice building, if you take the truth out of it, if you don't think it's true, it's not really doing service or helping anybody. You know what I mean? We're just dunking in the water. We're doing things that we think are good. But if you take the truth out of it,
if you take the truth out of it, that's a pretty big caveat.
But I mean, but you can serve. But I'm just saying, you can serve others without a religious context.
I understand how it can.
And
look.
so that's what I'm saying. Like the temples aren't really helping people if people don't believe. You know what I mean?
Well, I understand, but for those that do believe, it's prophetic.
Right.
Okay, so you have to. The prophet, he's taking. Listen, when the Savior was here, this is how many followed. The majority did.
Mm-hmm.
When Moses was here, this is how many really followed most of them.
Right.
Okay. So
But Moses came down with the 10 Commandments.
They didn't follow. Right.
He had the burning bush. Like they had miracles. Like he was a prophet. He was these guys were dividing waters.
The miracles of what's happened here.
Well, yeah. Like why can't the prophets of today do what the prophets of old could do? Because trust me, if Moses lived today and he was doing that stuff, I'm all in. Like I'm sign me up. Like I would be all for it. But But prophets that don't reveal anything, they don't see anything, they're just like us, they don't, communicate with God. That to me is...
They do communicate with God. I don't want you leaving here today believing that this...
Right,
Right, no, you guys believe that, of course,
sure.
but I don't know.
But I don't think it was all that
Why?
clear to Moses' people either, right? Or to the people at Christ's time either, right? So, I mean, I think there's just always this necessity, we think if we were back in Moses' time, like, there wouldn't have been a need for faith because we would have seen these miracles, right?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I've seen more miracles come out of the evangelical side of religion more than our church. I mean, if you want to talk about people that are actually doing miracles, man, look at an evangelical convention where they get people that are truly sick, they can't walk, and they're healing people, and they're performing miracles. And I know a guy, he's a traveling minister, and he does that. He goes to Ethiopia, he goes to Africa, and he does true service. Like, he's trying to teach people, how to get clean water, you know what I mean, how to work, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's so small compared to what we give, though.
I don't know that it's as
I mean, when you do the math...
How many countries you've done humanitarian work in?
Probably a lot, but for a church that makes, $10 billion a year? I mean, I would think it would be more than that, but instead they put it into, like, City Creek. Like, why be a corporation, you know what I mean? Like, why own...
So that's why they make as much money. Okay, so let me tell you, if other stuff, you can hold your breath on all that, okay?
I mean, but I don't understand why they get involved in that stuff, because since it's all derived from tithing, originally.
No, it's not. It didn't come from tithing.
But, like, why? Like, why City Creek, though?
Because, you know what happens to downtowns when you don't have something like City Creek? Do you want to go to Detroit? Do you want to go speak to Chicago?
Well, I think there are a lot of great cities that don't need religious.
I didn't say religious. It's not about religious. I'm talking about the purpose is to keep the downtown.
Keep the front door of the Temple Square in a decent sort of place.
I can see that.
I think that's...
But I think they could do that and make it more...
Yeah, maybe you don't
churchy.
need a store, right?
Don't need an H&M.
We can all debate that, but but I think that was the motivation, right? To protect that downtown area.
No question.
Right, and
right?
yeah,
it's not about profits.
Yeah, it's more of a church.
And I will say that until I worked here, I didn't have any sense of the extent of the humanitarian.
Well, we don't know because they don't release any of the financial documents. Like, I wish the church would be a little more transparent in that regard. Like, we're all paying, and we can't participate unless we pay. Whereas other churches, they ask for donations, and it's out of the goodness of your heart. Here, you have to pay 10%, and that, to me, to get into heaven, you have to pay. Like, there's a price for that. That's kind of messed up, I think. Because tithing, I don't believe tithing was meant to be like that. I think tithing was meant to be give out of the goodness of your heart, help others. You know what I mean? So
okay, so that's.
But yeah, like,
I can tell you without tithing where this church would be. Okay, it was a bankrupt church until it was implemented by Lorenzo Snow. Okay.
Kirtland Bank.
Well, Kirtland Bank's a different guy.
That's a different story.
I know it's a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
No problem. There's going to be some more problems.
Yeah.
President Hinckley authorized him to buy these records. He was suggested by somebody that they should buy them. Okay.
Right.
And it was a church historian or somebody over here that thought that they were true. And more importantly, the number of documents by that guy are huge, and they were everywhere.
Right.
It isn't just the church.
Right.
Okay. It isn't just the church that was sucked in. Okay?
I was in a historical convention,
but they were sucked in
with people from papers projects from around the nation, and someone listed off the sort of documents that Hoffman had forged, and almost every group in that room. He had Lincoln, he had Jefferson, he had Emily Dickinson, and he wrote an Emily Dickinson poem that fooled the experts, right? So, but anyway,
it goes down to my whole profit thing.
The papers are worth. No, I don't think he wasn't. I mean, he just decided to buy this stuff. We do a lot of things that we don't go pray over. Okay.
Right.
I mean, it's just like members that wait to pray over everything they're going to do. They're never going to do anything.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
I'm not going to take any more of it.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you looking at this stuff and just, yeah.
Could I get your email address?
Yes.
Maybe I'll shoot you a few other.
I think you've probably got it.
I've got
yeah,
it.
you've got it.
Yeah, maybe I'll shoot you
Shoot
a
me
few
some
other
stuff.
suggestions for reading. And
Would love it.
If I can make reading assignments. It sounds like you like to read.
I love to read.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, every night, 3 or 4 hours a night, I'm reading.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, Matt, I appreciate your time.
Hey.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Trevor. Nice to meet you, Veronica.